My name is Benjamin Flory Cruz, and I am here to talk about the Blackfoot Confederacy and their mythology that they had. So, the Blackfoot Confederacy were a group of Native Americans. There were a couple groups in there, and they're very closely related to many of the nearby Native American groups as well. They were in the northern Great Plains area. They roamed. They were nomadic bison hunters, salmon fishers, and they would travel around in teepees. They were one of the nomadic tribes. And their mythology is very interesting, very focused on nature, like a lot of Native Americans were. Their creation of their world, in their eyes, started off with the Old Man, or Nappy, as he is called. So one day, Nappy was on. It's either he was walking on the water, or there's a great raft. There's a couple different interpretations, but Nappy and many semi-aquatic mammals that were common in the area were on an expansive lake. It was endless water. That was the world. That made up the world. And one day, Nappy said, "I want to make land." He wanted to form the world. So he looked down and saw that very far down, almost unseeable, was likely mud on the bottom. And he said, "Hey, if I can dry some of this mud, I can create land masses." So one by one, each semi-aquatic creature would go dive down, and they would come back up. They said, "I can't reach it, Nappy." And until eventually he got to the muskrat, and the muskrat dove down, and he barely made it back up with his life, and he had a handful of mud. Nappy took that, dried it out, spread it across the world, and he created the land. And Nappy went on to slowly go lazily about and form everything. He formed the hills, he sculpted them perfectly, and then he went on to create the animals. He would create an animal in one location. Notice they weren't doing so well. He would move them to where they are meant to be, and he said, "This is your place. This is where you are meant to be." He did that for all the animals. Now, the Blackfeet are very spiritual, of course, and they believed that when they died, they would be moving on to another life in the future. So, like many different cultures, they actually would be buried or put to rest with a lot of their possessions to help them in the next life. One of these being a medicine shield, which I will talk about shortly, very important to their culture. Oftentimes they would actually be buried in their teepee, and if they died in their teepee, that teepee would be unable to be used again. The Blackfeet feared the spirits of the dead. They wanted nothing to do with them, and once someone died, that teepee's taboo. They would actually move people out of the teepees sometimes in order to be able to use that teepee again, and they would sometimes do tree burials, although that became less common as time went on. So the human creation myth involved Nappy, of course. After he had created the land and the animals, he actually took clay. He said, "I want to make something new." He took clay, sculpted humans. In the beginning, they actually had claws-like beasts, much like many of the other animals he was making, and then he taught the humans slowly. He gave them the tools they needed to survive. If they were having an unfair, if the odds were stacked against them, he would even the odds. The buffalo, which are very revered by the Blackfeet, actually ate humans in the past, according to their creation myth. And Nappy looked upon that and said, "That's not fair." He reversed the odds, taught the humans how to hunt the buffalo, how to make them fall off cliffs, and how to eat them instead. He balanced it out. So after having that as their background, the Blackfeet, of course, respected nature massively. The animals, they believed, were just as wise as humans. They were equals, essentially. They didn't look down upon the animals. They respected them. Of course, like many Native American groups, they used all parts of the animals as a sign of respect in their mythology. Now, back to the medicine shields. Each warrior would actually, after meeting their first enemy, they would make a medicine shield, or rather, they would have a dream on how it needed to be constructed, and one of the elders would generally make it for them. Someone who's very good at it. It's meant for blocking arrows. They can push aside enemy attacks with them. They are actually laid to rest with them, and they receive power from the animal on the front. They have to. The same dream that tells them how they are supposed to look and how they're supposed to be constructed also tells them what they need to do in order to gain the respect of the shield spirit, actually. So once they did that, this shield would protect them, and it would keep them safe. Now back to Nappy. Now Nappy is, well, he did create humans. He is often considered one and the same as the sun. However, Nappy has a bit more of a tricky side, and Nappy is actually considered a major trickster. Bad luck in the end. Nappy would transform into other animals and creatures in order to trick people. He would do that to help people. In one legend, he actually there was this family that were keeping all the animals of the plains and the forest to themselves, and Nappy transformed to trick them, and then turned him into a bird and strung him up over the smoke pit. He's definitely the trickster archetype. The sun, who what sometimes is considered Nappy but isn't, is much more that wise, benevolent being. He is the Senex archetype in their culture, essentially, and the entire world was his house. The world was his floor. The sun or the sky was his ceiling, and his wife was the moon, who fits the Magna Mater archetype. Many of the ancient heroes of the Blackfeet are actually children slash grandchildren of the moon, and she takes care of them much in the way a Magna Mater is supposed to in many cultures. Which goes to show even separated cultures like North American Indians follow the same storyboards oftentimes. Now, there weren't many other gods per se. They were forces of nature with a head to each group. There were the sky people, the underwater people, and the ground people. Now, chief of the sky people was Thunder. He made the rains. He took the form of a bird. He was often considered cowardly. It could be linked to how fleeting rains could be, there one time, gone the next. He was considered not the bravest. And then for the underground people, there was the ground man, who is essentially the power of the earth personified. And then lastly, there is the Windmaker, who is an underwater man. And Windmaker is supposed to roll the waves, which generates the wind. That's a bit of a confusion for cause and effect. The Indians saw the rolling waves, thought that that generated the wind, and not vice versa, which is really interesting. It's a really interesting insight into their mythology. Now, the main monomyth, a very large, important story to the Blackfeet, is the story of Bloodclot Boy. Now, this father-in-law and mother-in-law of this boy were being abused by him, and weren't being fed. The man found a blood clot on the ground, tried to turn it into some soup behind his son-in-law's back, and it turned into a boy. This boy saved them from their abuser and went on to become an epic hero. Doesn't quite fit the same way as many heroes' journeys do in the modern Western world, or even like the Greek stories and stuff like that. But he basically, after he solved his problem at home, he went out into the world. He went on his own hero's journey. He came across multiple villages, being kind of enslaved by different creatures. One were bears, one were snakes, and he would kill all but two. And those two were the ancestors of all animals of that species for the rest of time. So he is single-handedly responsible for that. He was actually, after that, he was sucked in by a great suckerfish, which is a perfect example of belly of the whale sort of part of the hero's journey. And like a typical hero of legend, he put a knife on his head, strapped it to his head, and danced with all the other people trapped in the great suckerfish's belly and cut out its heart with his head. And cut his way out, freed everyone, and they're saved. He then came across two different people laying traps in the road to try to kill and murder and steal, and he took care of them, killed them, and then he told himself, there are no more monsters in the world, I can go home. And Bloodclot Boy went home, which that's his name, after, I guess they weren't really the most best at coming up with names, but it fits. But Bloodclot Boy went home, relaxed, and retired with his parents. That is one of their epic monomyths that the Blackfeet have, and that is their mythology in a nutshell. They are a deeply spiritual people, deep respect for nature, and their whole world was beautiful in their eyes. Their beliefs were beautiful, they had a beautiful culture, and that's about it. Thank you for the presentation. I hope you were going along with the word search, and have a wonderful day.